Why new hate crime bill won't criminalise critics of the Rainbow Unicorn government, courtesy of Humza Yousaf, the same Humza Yousaf that's come out in the past and made the claim that the Scottish Parliament was too white. I'm really going to take what Humza Yousaf has to say very seriously. He's going to put my mind at ease, because the most concerning thing about this travesty of a bill that they are planning to put through the Parliament was the fact that I wouldn't be able to criticise the Scottish Government anymore. I'm so thankful for Humza Yousaf. He's here to put my mind at ease. As he goes on to say, hate crime has a real life consequence. Like many people, I have been subject to bigoted abuse and know the damaging impact it can have, not just in the individual, but on families and communities. I am asking Parliament to approve this bill, as creating robust laws will ensure action can be taken against perpetrators and send a strong message to victims and communities that offences motivated by prejudice are not tolerated. The bill has received support from numerous organisations, including the feminist organisation Engender, the Humanist Society of Rainbow Unicorn Land, and the Scottish Council of Jewish Communities. No mention of any Islamic communities, of course, though. You want to keep them out of the firing line, I presume, for this. The bill builds on existing laws, retaining existing characteristics in relation to the aggravation of offences by prejudice, and adds age as a new characteristic. Where a person is stirring up hatred in others, I believe criminal law should treat this as an offence. But it's not applied equally. I'm somebody that believes that all of this hate crime bollocks is exactly that. For lack of a better term, cancerous is probably a more apt term. But if you're going to apply this in the name of your nonsensical equality drive, it should be applied equally. But it's not applied equally. Time and time again, proposals are put forth, toolkits are published, legislation is proposed, and laws are passed. And each and every time, they seem to screw over the native Scottish people. And when I say native Scottish people, I mean ethnically Scottish people. A concept that seems to be buried under the rug, so the likes of Humza Yousaf can pretend they're just as Scottish as I am, while they make these draconian laws and shaft us in the process. This is not the Scotland I want, sorry. Wow, no. Stirring up hatred can incite people to commit offences, So it doesn't always, apparently, incite people to commit offences. It can. So it's not very specific. It's a possibility against the individuals in the targeted group and can contribute to an atmosphere in which prejudice is accepted as normal. Where's your basis of proof for this bollocks? There is none. It's just assumptions. Hypotheticals and a hypothesis, a nonsensical one at that. This is not the Scotland I want. Well, I hate to break it to you, Humza. It's not your country. And I know that if this law gets passed, that's the sort of thing that'll put me in jail. Potentially. But it's not your fucking country. Can you imagine that we went to Pakistan, where you're from, Humza, and we started to apply these same rules, the same methodology to your homeland? How do you think the Pakistani people living there would take that? Well, we know how they would take that, because they persecute Christians on the regular over there. Can't talk about that, no, can we? It's not the Scotland I want. It's not your country. Our legislation, if passed, would offer greater protection for those who suffer from this kind of behaviour. So, we'd offer greater protection from those who suffer. So not everybody, because it's not going to be applied equally. It's the specific groups that you have put into a category of potentially have been affected by this. Or could be potentially affected by this, sorry. Groups that you've already singled out as minorities. Groups you've already singled out as supposedly oppressed. Groups that you've already singled out as groups that need this sort of thing to be implemented in order for their protection. The bill provides for new stirring up of hatred offences that would apply to all characteristics listed in the bill. Age, disability, race, religion, sexual orientation, transgender identity, and variations in sex characteristics. And you know, this is where it comes rather obvious from where I'm sat, that the likes of Humza Yousaf in sheep's clothing, realistically, him and Anas Sarwar, because the religion that they preach and practice is hell-bent, is dead against transgender identities, feminism. They're dead against homosexuality. They may tell you otherwise, but I really find it difficult to believe that they're in favour of these things. But they're quite prepared to politicise these issues in order to further their own ends. And as for race, as I said previously in the last video regarding this, they don't believe in race, these people that profess this progressive or communist ideology. It's a social construct. Race only applies, or racism only applies, to white people. Only white people can be racist because, according to these people, we racialised everybody. We ran around the world, gallivanted around the world even, and racialised everyone. And treated them as subordinate, seen them as subordinate, and whites as supreme. They don't believe in race. They proclaim we invented race. Currently, such offences only apply to racial hatred, which doesn't go both ways. Chris Donald. I say no more. The racial hatred offence criminalises conduct which includes insulting behaviour intended or likely to stir up hatred. This approach is nothing new in Scots law, our law, not yours. Stirring up of racial hatred in this form have been part of Scots criminal law since 1986. That's great. The new stirring up of hatred offences for the other characteristics use a threshold that the conduct must be threatening or abusive. Actions must be threatening or abusive before the new stirring up of hatred offence can be committed. I'm likely to stir up hatred. So it doesn't have to stir up hatred, which in and of itself would be still an issue. But just because it might potentially stir up this so-called hatred. So it doesn't have to stir up this hatred, it just potentially could stir up hatred. So actions must be either threatening or abusive before the new stirring up of hatred offence can be committed. I firmly believe that the bill strikes the right balance between respecting freedom of speech and tackling hate speech. And it's the age-old question again, who defines hate speech? Because from where I'm sat, it just appears as if anybody that has a differing opinion to the progressive shit that you're implementing in our academia is branded as a racist, they're branded as a bigot, they're branded as far right, they're branded as a white supremacist, they're branded as spewing out hate speech, for lack of a better term or to put it bluntly. But he's going to be clear, Humza's going to be clear, crybaby Humza. Let me be clear. People can hold and express views on any topic and subject, including opposing Scottish Government policy. Well, that is a sigh of relief. Wow. Oh, wow, colour me blind. Not a criminal offence to do so, unless it's expressed in an abusive and threatening manner, with an intention to stir up hatred. So we've gone from the original hate crime legislation that was put forward for a couple of years back, where they decided that you didn't have to specifically say or do something to somebody. All that had to occur was the victim of said incident to feel or perceive what happened to them or what was said to them to have been motivated by prejudice. Now you're taking it a step further and suggesting that people are entitled to criticise government policy, but if they do so with the intention of stirring up hatred, regardless of whether or not they've made that clear, that is a problem. That ticks the box of hate crime. Stirring up of hatred offences do not unduly inhibit freedom of expression protections set out in the ECHR. The bill's provisions on freedom of expression provide reassurance that stirring up offences will not simply unduly restrict people's right to express their faith, or to criticise religions, beliefs or practices or sexual practices. Freedom of expression is not without limit, but this bill will not inhibit controversial and challenging views being offered as long as this is not done in a way that is threatening or abusive. But again, who defines what's threatening and or abusive? Again, in the one breath, you're saying that people are entitled to criticise these subjects, these sore points, if you're a rainbow unicorn snowflake. But then in the next breath, you're essentially saying that they can only do it in the way that you wish them to, if at all. You get to determine, you get to dictate how somebody goes about, if at all, criticising any of these sore points. Which one is it? Lord Bracadale recommended that gender should be added to hate crime law, and leading feminist organisations were opposed to this. They proposed a standalone offence on misogynistic harassment to be developed within the government, which is committed to in principle. Lord Bracadale, again, you don't include why leading women's organisations were opposed to this. You do not include misandry as something to commit to in principle. No, you talk about misogynistic harassment as a policy to be enshrined in law. You talk about a standalone offence that you've committed to in principle. Why don't you elaborate on why these women's organisations were opposed to this? Because it was feminists opposed to it, because they wouldn't be able to shit on white men. The working group will consider how Scotland's criminal justice system deals with misogyny, not misandry, misogyny, including consideration of a specific offence of misogynistic harassment. And again, who determines misogynistic harassment and whether sex should be added to the characteristics law, in hate crime law, sorry. We're living through extremely challenging times, but it is important that victims and witnesses continue to report hate crime to the police or through a third-party reporting centre. We have a responsibility to challenge prejudice against minorities to ensure Scotland is an anti-white society. This bill will play an important part in realising this. Humza Yousaf is a Scottish justice dickhead.